This is an interview with Joseph Marino, Days Inn, Hicksville, New York, June 24th, 2003, approximately 9 a.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you tell me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Joseph, middle initial A, Marino, 3/20/23.
Okay, and where were you born?
Corona, New York.
All right. What was your educational background prior to entering the service?
I went to the grammar school naturally, and then I went to the New York School of Printing.
Okay.
And that was it.
All right. Do you remember where you were and what your reaction was when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I was in the. Do you remember the Civilian Conservation Corps?
Yes.
Well, I was in the Civilian Conservation Corps at the time, and it was on Sunday. And when I was upstate New York, and we got word that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Nobody knew where Pearl Harbor was at the time, and what I did, I got permission from my company commander to go. I wanted to enlist in the Navy, and I went to New York City, and I got all the papers, and I had to get my father's signature to approve because I was underage at the time. But because I had two other brothers in, he wouldn't sign the papers. And 3 months later, on my 19th birthday, I asked him to sign the papers, and he did. And I joined the Navy.
Okay, why did you join the Navy?
I don't know, I just picked it. My two brothers were in the Army, pardon me, and I don't know why I picked the Navy, but I thought it would be I really don't know why I joined the Navy.
Okay. Had you ever been on ships or anything?
Never.
Never. Okay. Where did you go for? Where was your induction and your basic training?
Newport, Rhode Island. I left New York. I went on a train. My mother just packed a little box for me, and that was the end of it. And I went to Newport, Rhode Island for 8 weeks basic training, boot camp.
Did you have any kind of specialized training, or was it just...
No, making a bunk. Well, first of all, we didn't have to make bunks. We slept in hammocks.
Oh, really?
And it was tough, because naturally, you don't sleep in a hammock this way in the Navy. You sleep this way, almost like in a canoe. And a lot of guys couldn't get used to it. And naturally, when you go into a hammock, you got to climb up into it, and you could only lay this way in a hammock. You can't twist or turn or lay on your stomach. You learn how to sleep on your back. In the morning, when you get up, you have to trice up your hammock and put it in a bin, because the room has to be completely empty, and that's when you start cleaning the floors and polishing the decks and all that. And then we went through the marching business, and the reason why they call you boots, you wear leggings in the Navy. That's where you get the name boots. A lot of people don't know that. Once you remove your boots, you're not a boot anymore. Then, after my 8 weeks training, I didn't get any leave. They sent me to Great Lakes, Illinois to go to school, a service school, which I didn't like. I wanted to go to sea. And after several weeks of schooling in the Great Lakes, I requested sea duty. And they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia for amphibious training, which was something new in the Navy at the time. And I was stationed on a ship called the Joseph T. Dickman. And it was a Coast Guard ship, but we were doing amphibious training with the troops, going down in the cargo nets and all. From the Joseph T. Dickman, I was transferred to Samuel Chase. After several weeks of training there, they transferred me from Norfolk, Virginia to the West Coast.
Can I ask a question a minute? What kind of amphibious boats were they using? Were they using the Higgins boats?
Yes, the Higgins, right. All small boats. They taught us how to beach them and all that, which was exciting because I was a coxswain. Well, we took turns. It would be the bow hook one day, the next day you would be the stern hook, and they taught us how to heave the line and all basic stuff. But we used to hit the beach and show the troops would go down the cargo nets into our boat, and then we'd maneuver, go back to the ship. They'd climb back up. It was all basic stuff. Then they sent me to San Diego, California for more extensive training. And from San Diego, I was assigned to a ship called the USS Mizar, which was a cargo attack vessel. And it was in San Francisco, California. And we got orders that we were going to leave to go to the Pacific, which nobody knew at the time. They made speeches and told us don't eat the vegetables because the natives use their own excrement to fertilize. You see cabbages this big, but you couldn't eat it because we would get parasites and stuff, which they were immune to. And stuff like that. They gave us all kinds of speeches. And at the time, naturally, the Japs had the whole Pacific. We were more or less getting the behinds kicked by them because they were almost into Australia. And my first port of call after 40 days on the USS Mizar was New Zealand. From New
Did you go there in a convoy or was it a single ship?
All by ourselves. No convoy, no nothing. And on the main deck, every day they would change. We had a code and it was out of metal plates. Like if the plane went over, the plates were like one day would be an X, next day would be a T, and they would know from seeing this that we were a friendly ship because we're traveling all by ourselves. The USS Mizar was an old fruit ship from the United Fruit Lines, and they converted to an attack cargo. And one of my first jobs was a hot shellman. You know what a hot shellman is? Well, anyway, we practiced all day long shooting a gun, and they gave me a pair of asbestos gloves this high, and I would have to catch the shell as it was ejected out of the gun. Thank God we never had to use that because it became. But that was my first job as on a ship, a hot shellman they called it.
What'd you do with the shell after you got it?
You're supposed to heave it over the side, but naturally it was only a dummy, and then you passed it on to some. You don't want to see all these shells all over the deck, so you caught the shell and boom, you heaved it over the side. And that was my first job, a hot shellman. And I was only a seaman second class at the time. Then, as I said, we went from New Zealand to Sydney. And I don't know why orders came from me that they were going to transfer me to a little base outside of Newcastle, Australia, which was 90 miles from Sydney. Because I had all this training with the amphibs, we were going to teach the Australians how to, amphibious warfare. And all day long we practiced with the Australian sailors and soldiers how to land. And I was a coxswain on one of the boats. That's the guy that drives the boat. The LCPs, LCPRs, LCMs. And there was 26 of us in this camp.
So you now had gone from the Higgins boats to...
No, we're still on Higgins.
You're still on Higgins,
yes,
okay.
Yes, and we were teaching the Australians because they never saw Higgins boats before. And the first Higgins boats didn't have any ramps.
Right.
They used to jump over the side, and then they started to come out with the LCVPs, which was the vehicles with the ramps. And we learned all the basics about that. We taught the Australians that. I got orders to move to Brisbane, which was closer to New Guinea, and that's where I picked up my first landing craft ship, was the LCI 340. And we went from Brisbane all along the coast we went over across the Great Barrier Reef, the Coral Sea, and our first port of call was Milne Bay. And at the time, a battle was going on with strictly land forces. No Navy was involved. It was the Australian 9th and 7th Division and the American 32nd Division, where they walked over the Owen Stanley Mountains from Port Moresby to Boona. And it was a pretty bad battle, and our first job was to take the casualties out and bring them back to the rear. And then we finally got orders that we're going to make our first amphibious assault, which was in a group of islands. There was Goodenough Island, there was Woodlock Island, there was Carawina Island. These are all little islands off the coast of Australia where we wanted to establish air bases so we could have planes land. And first combat I saw was in September. We landed the Australian troops in Lae, New Guinea.
Now, was this September of what year?
Yes, September 43.
43.
This is the photograph of an Australian photographer took this photograph right after the landing.
Here, if you hold it up in front of you.
Just hold it like
She
that.
put that on the computer for me. We were on our way back to the staging area to pick up more troops. And in this specific landing, 6 Zeeks, which we know as Zeros, and 3 Betty bombers attacked us. They sunk the USS LCI 339 and the USS LCI 341. And we were hit also, but we lost 1 soldier and killed and 1 sailor wounded. Then on the way back, like I said, the photographer.
Okay, you can put that down. No, thank you.
The photographer took this picture. We went back, got more troops, and went back. Because all this takes time, you know. By the time they established the beachhead and so on and so forth, came back, took more troops, and then, like I always told people, I gave a class a couple of weeks ago. Now you just hang around and it's all boredom. Like just hang a chip and paint and so on, and more training. The next landing was at Finchhaven, which was also with the 9th and 7th Division Australian. They were very famous from Tobruk. They were called the Tobruk Rats. They're the ones that fought against Rommel. And we worked with them extensively because they were the guys we trained with. Before we even came to New Guinea, we trained with them in Australia. And then the next landing was with the 1st Division Marines, who were famous on Guadalcanal, right? We landed them in Cape Gloucester, Christmas Day of 1943. And that was a pretty bad one too. And we all know what they went through in Guadalcanal. And a lot of people know Guadalcanal as a very famous battle, but very few people ever heard of Cape Gloucester, New Britain, which took place on Christmas Day. There's no such thing as Christmas Day when you're fighting a war, right? So anyway, we came back to the staging area, landed more troops, which was a repetitious thing. You bring troops in, you take troops out, that casualties, and bring them back to the rear. We had hospital ships that were converted from LSTs, being that I was in the famous 7th Amphibious Forces. Admiral Daniel Bobby was in charge. They used to call him Uncle Dan. He made the amphibious warfare very famous because he had one of the most famous outfits, which was called the 7th Amphibious Forces. He was directly under MacArthur, and they called it MacArthur's Amphibious Navy. MacArthur was, we all know, was the big boss, so what he said went. And the next landing was in Sadar, New Guinea, which was New Year's Day, with the 32nd Division, the Bushmasters. They got their name from being trained in Panama. And a very famous snake in Panama is called the Bushmaster. And they adopted that name, and they became the famous Bushmasters, the 32nd Division. It was like a regiment attached to the 32nd Division. And we worked extensively with them also. And most of them were National Guard outfit from the West. There were a lot of Indians, American Indians, and a lot of Mexicans. But naturally, when the war came, they drafted Brooklyn boys and Jersey boys. So there was a lot of New York boys in there too. And they saw a lot of action too. Like I always told Doreen and my friends, we landed them and then we skedaddled. And I always take off my hat to infantrymen because to me they're the guys that did all the dirty work. They lived in mud and slush and had to wash out of helmets and cook out of their helmets, where we had a pretty nice deal living on a ship when we had nice hot meals, although there was powdered eggs and so on and so forth. But whenever I see an infantryman, especially with that blue badge, I almost salute them, because to me, they're the guys that do all the work, winning the war. Although it takes everybody, you know, supplies and stuff. But I knew what it was because I worked directly with the infantry. We carried 200 infantrymen to the beach. One company. Then we would go back, pick up another company, bring them, and then the second guys naturally, they didn't have to worry about the beachhead because the beachhead was already secured. But they still had to go into the jungles and fight the Japs because they were pretty good fighters. A lot of people don't know that. We always hear about the European with D-Day. That's another thing a lot of people don't know. D-Day doesn't mean D-Day June 6th. It means any debarkation day. General Eichelberger, who was the second in command under MacArthur, made 52 D-Days. See, when we hear D-Day, we think of June 6th, right? Mm-hmm. But any D-Day that we land on, I guess you know that, is debarkation day. She didn't know it either. Then, naturally, the rest of it was repetitious. Altogether I made 12 D-Day landings. I finally got my orders, because I was overseas 2 years, I got my orders to rotate back to the States.
And what do you think was your most harrowing experience?
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Okay. Okay.
The kamikazes.
Okay.
But that came later. But anyway, I spent 2 years in the Pacific, and I got orders to go home. And I went home on a ship called the Sea Cat, which was an Army transport. And a very eventful thing happened on that ship. We crossed the international date line and the equator the same day, which is almost unheard of. We crossed the international date line going back home. I got home in the winter of '44. And here I am, I'm spending almost 2 years in the tropics, a few miles from the equator. I was sick as a dog. I went home. I got a 30-day leave. I got the train from San Francisco to New York. And when I left, we all know there were stars in the windows, you know, right? When I left, there was only 2 stars in my house from my 2 older brothers. I lived in a 2-family house. When I came home, there were 7 stars in my house. My younger brother, who was only 15 years old, enlisted in the Navy. He was in the North Atlantic on a cruiser. So here I am, I come home and I see 7 stars in the window, but no gold stars, which was in our favor, because you know what a gold star was, the Gold Star mothers. And I got a 30-day leave, and everything was rationed. We all know that, right? Everything, especially steaks. And in them days, there was no such thing as supermarkets. We had little neighborhood stores, so my mother would go to see the local butcher, say, Tony, my son Joey's home. I need a nice big porterhouse steak. So she wanted to fatten me up because I was skinny as a pencil. So anyway, I got my 30-day leave. I got orders to report to Little Creek, Virginia. By that time, I was a third-class petty officer. I had made third-class petty officer by that time. And I was going to go for new construction. My ship was being built in Houston, Texas. And we got it like they put together a crew. Naturally, they're all young kids, 17, 18 years old, never away from home. And here I am, an old salt at 20 years old. You know? And there was, I think, 5 or 6 of us that had already seen combat. And we were more or less like the mother hens to these kids. And we went through extensive training in Little Creek, the whole bit, learned gunnery and firefighting, the whole knot tying, map reading, everything. We finally got our orders that we're going to go to Texas, where our ship was being built. And on our way from Little Creek to Texas, the troop train was in a train wreck in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And naturally, a lot of people got hurt. And once everything was secure, we went to Texas, where our ship was being built, and we lived in barracks because naturally we couldn't live on a ship that was. And I became what they call a plank owner. You know what a plank owner is, right? A plank owner is, well, anyway, I was a plank owner because I was there when they commissioned the ship. Pardon me. And one of my honors was to pipe the admiral aboard because I was a bosun's mate, right? I piped the admiral aboard when they commissioned the ship. Once they commissioned the ship, we went on a shakedown cruise, the Gulf of Mexico, went back to take all the kinks out of the, they shoot all the guns and you go as fast as you can forward and as fast as you can reverse, and they took all the kinks out. Once we were secure, we got orders that we were going to go to the Pacific. Our first port of call was Gulfport, Mississippi. And we picked on some supplies that we were going to take through the ditch. We went from Gulfport, Mississippi to Panama, where we dropped the anchor. And naturally, all the big boys that got the priorities. Like I was on the USS LSM 484. That was the ship I was commissioned. And we went through the canal, up the coast of Central America, to San Diego. From San Diego we went to Long Beach. From Long Beach we got orders to go to Pearl Harbor. Went to Pearl Harbor. From Pearl Harbor we went to Anahuac, which is in the Marshall Islands. From the Marshall Islands we went to the Marianas, which was Guam and Saipan. And between Guam and Saipan is Tinian. We know that island where the B-29s were, which was almost like a secret island. We weren't allowed to go ashore there because nobody was supposed to see the B-29. But we did go ashore for supplies. And I saw the B-29s, which was amazing to me at the time because before then the 17s were the biggest thing we all saw. And our next port of call was Okinawa. And that's where we start seeing the kamikazes, the divine wind coming down. And naturally, they always went for the big boys. They went for the carriers, but it was still scary for us too. We start throwing our stuff at, but even more scary than that was a typhoon we were in. We were in a couple of typhoons, and we lost quite a few ships in the typhoons, which was even worse than the kamikazes, because you can't fight a typhoon. You can fight a ship coming at you. Anyway, after that, they dropped the bomb, and we got orders to go, not to Japan, to liberate the Koreans, because they were under Japanese rule at the time. And we went to Incheon, which wasn't called Incheon, it was called Jinsen at the time, because the Japanese had their own names, like Seoul was Keijo, and today it's called Seoul, but at that time it was called Keijo, and Incheon was called Jinsen. The Japanese gave their names. In fact, the Korean people wanted to be called Chosen. They said, we're not Nippons, we're Chosen, because it went back to hundreds and hundreds of years where they always under somebody's rule, like the Japanese or the Mongolians or whatever. But we liberated them, and then I finally got orders to come back home. And we landed in Washington State. I got orders to go to Lido Beach, Long Island, which I thought was so far away from home, which was only a few miles from Corona. And the Navy took over a hotel, the Lido Hotel, and that's where I got my discharge. And went home, and we all joined the 5220. You know what the 5220 was, right?
Yeah.
Because there was no work for us.
How long did you collect?
I collected. I'd collect and then try to get a job, and I'd work, and then today they call it post-war syndrome. I couldn't adjust. It was hard. I went back to sea in a merchant marine, and I still couldn't adjust. I came back.
How long were you with the Merchant Marines?
Altogether 6 years, but this was after I went in the Army. I came back from a couple of trips. We made a trip to France, and I was on a J. Willard Gibbs, which was a Liberty ship. Came back home, and I still couldn't adjust, and I said, I'm going to go re-enlist in the Navy. So I went down to 90 Church Street, and I wanted to enlist in the Navy, and all the ranks were frozen, because a lot of guys were going back in. And I said, well, I'm going to do something. And I went to Whitehall Street and joined the Army. And I went in the Army as a corporal. I didn't have to take any basic training because of my training, and they shipped me right overseas, and I spent the next 3.5 years in Europe, in the occupation. I spent 3.5 years in Germany and 6 months in France with the occupation.
Whereabouts in Germany were you?
I was stationed in Bremerhaven, but I was all over Germany, and I was there when they had the airlift and all that. We went mostly alert because we always had to worry about the Russian. You know, they chopped. I was stationed in what they call the Bremen Enclave. See, they had 4 sections. Russia had 1 sector, France had 1 section, and British had, and we had, but they gave us an enclave because we didn't have any ports to land our troops and our supplies. So they cut a little piece out of the British sector and gave it to us, which they called the Bremen Enclave, and that's where I was stationed for 3.5 years. From there I got orders to go to France. And I went to France, and finally after I only enlisted for 3 years. But because of the Korean War, Truman, which we called the Truman year, extended us 1 more year. And I spent 4 years in the Army, the regular Army. When I came home, I still was a little, I still had a little wanderlust in me. I went with the Military Sea Transportation Service. That was MSTS. It used to be Army Transport, and then they converted. And I served 4 years on the USNS General Patch. And I was on a Heisselman, I was on a Stewart, but I became a homesteader, what they call a homesteader, on the Patch. I spent 4 years on a Patch and 2 years on a Derby, the General Derby. And that's the extent of my military.
So how many years did you have?
14 years altogether.
So
what happened then, I got out, and because I like to be around ships, I took the test for the Navy Yard, and I got a job as a rigger, which I loved, and I worked on some big ships. I mothballed the Jersey. Well, we mothballed the Jersey. I worked on a Constellation. I worked on every phase of rigging on a ship. And when the yard closed, they gave us a choice. If we wanted to go to, like, Philadelphia, which was 90 miles away. I had 2 little children. I didn't want to go away. So I sat down and I took the test for the post office because I wanted to keep my government time. And I became a letter carrier. And I retired as a letter carrier. But all that time counted. I had 36 years government service.
Now, did you get a pension from the military?
No. Zip. That's it.
You didn't have enough time?
No. See, that's one thing. Other countries, if you put 5 or 6 years, in the American military, you got to put a full 20 unless you go on disability. If you don't put that full 20 in, you don't get it. Mm-hmm. So because I didn't want to lose that time, I took all kinds of tests, but then I chose the post office because it was government. And when I retired, all that time, see, they gave us credit for that. Mm-hmm. They gave me credit for my Navy, they gave me credit for my Army, and they gave me credit for my Merchant Marine. Not civilian Merchant Marine, MSTS. That was government. The other Merchant Marine was Union, you know. Mm-hmm. But anything that had to do with the government, I got credit for. Mm-hmm. And I retired as a letter carrier.
Can I go back and ask a couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
What were your relationships like with the Australian military?
I love the Australians. I love the Germans more than anybody. Believe it or not, I did.
Why the Australians and why the Germans?
Well, first of all, they befriended us.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are. I'm 10,000 miles away from my house, or maybe even more, and I'm helping to defend. They were ready. The Japs were ready to go from Port Moresby into Darwin, which was the northern part of Australia, and they were a little worried. When MacArthur came, naturally, they made him Supreme Commander. He had nothing because everything was going back to Europe. So priority was in Europe, with Churchill making deals with Roosevelt. We had beans compared to Europe. Then finally, when they saw what was going on, they started sending. I got treated pretty good in Australia. I got along very well. Wherever I went, I became native. If I went to France, I wanted the people to like me. I don't want to. You heard the stories about the English, how they didn't like too much. They said, well, you're overpaid, you're overfed, you're oversexed, and you're over here, right?
How about your feelings about MacArthur?
Well,
what did you think of him?
Well, they had nicknames for him, which they called Dugout Doug. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he deserved the Medal of Honor, personally, because he left his troops behind, but that was orders. He got orders from the Roosevelt, who was he's the head of everybody. He's the chief executive of all of armed forces. But naturally, the troops didn't like him too much. They didn't like him, especially the guys in Bataan and the guys in the Death March, because they felt that he left them behind. And personally, I saw him a couple of times. I had no likes or dislikes for him. I figured, hey, this guy's a genius. And he saved a lot of lives with this island hopping, see, where in Europe, Anzio alone, they lost about 30, 40,000, where he knew strategy. That's one thing about MacArthur. You got to take your hat off him. He knew his strategy. He was our youngest chief of staff. He was a 4-star general when he was only a young man. He was one of the youngest. But the only thing, I don't think he deserved the Medal of Honor. Personally, that's my personal opinion, but I have nothing to say about that.
How did you feel about the death of President Roosevelt? Do you recall?
Well, we all took it pretty bad, but we knew that things had to go on. When Truman took over, naturally he's only a figurehead when it comes to war. Still, the big boys are the guys that like Nimitz and MacArthur and Patton. They're the ones that call all the shots. But still, he was the boss, and we took it pretty sad. We took it pretty sad.
How did you feel about the dropping of the atomic bombs?
Well, at the time, we didn't even know. We called it the Buck Rogers bomb, because and I was happy because I'm going to go home now. And then 2 days later, or 3 days later, they dropped the second one. I was even more happy because we know. In fact, I got pictures of the. Do you know that the surrender planes were 2 Betty bombers painted white with green crosses? Well, I got pictures of that, right, Doreen? What happened is MacArthur gave orders to send 2 bombers painted white with green crosses to come to Okinawa with the entourage to surrender people. Once they got off the plane, then we took them to Bataan, and they named the 2 planes Bataan 1 and Bataan 2, and I have pictures of them planes. They landed in a little island called Ayashima, where we all know that Ernie Powell got killed, right? He got killed with working with the 77th Division, which was a New York State division.
How did you feel about hearing about his death?
Very sad, because we knew he came there after spending all that time in Italy with he was one of the guys that helped the guys get the 10%, I think it was, with the infantryman's badge. He was one of the men that did it. And he was so low-keyed, and when they made movies with Burgess Meredith playing the part, I was very impressed, because here was a man, he wrote about the common soldier. He didn't write about the guys with the crushed hats and the champagne. He wrote about the guys in the mud, like when the guy got killed and he'd come down with the mule from the hills of Italy. And it was very impressive. I read all his books. He's buried in Hawaii, in the bowl. That's where Ernie Powell is buried. He's buried in Hawaii. They took his body from Okinawa to Hawaii. That's where he's buried. I'm pretty sure about that.
Did you ever use the GI Bill?
Yes. I went to school. I went to acting school. But I didn't like that either. I tried anything.
Did you ever join any veterans organizations?
Yes, I belonged to all of them. I belonged to the DAV, I belonged to the American Legion, I belonged to the VFW.
I noticed it said you hurt your back during an air attack. How did that happen?
Well, we went, I think Hollandia was the place. And believe it or not, this one plane come over and dropped one 500-pound bomb. I think one ship got sunk and several people got, and I was below decks at the time, and the steel table fell on top of me. And that's the extent of my injury. But it wasn't in, like, more or less in battle. I wasn't wounded or nothing like that. I'm a disabled veteran, 0 disability. In other words, I don't get any compensation, which I'm fighting right now after all these years.
Did you ever keep in contact with anyone that you served with?
Yes. In fact, I belonged to an organization called the LSM organization, and my name was one of the newsletters. and I got a little card from a fellow by the name of Martin. I don't know, I couldn't remember Martin, but he was an officer, and he was living in Charleston, North Carolina, and we kept writing each other, and he's the one that gave me my test for Boatswains mate second class, and it brought back a lot of memories. In fact, I needed a letter from him saying that I was injured when the train wreck, and he wrote a nice letter which I sent to the VA, which I hope it would help me. And a friend of mine, who's quite extensive on a computer, got another fella that was on an LCI with me, and his name was Bill Freeman. Well, we're all old farts today, but he was a 17-year-old kid at the time. Like, I can't picture him an old man with gray hair, you know. He had a little skinny kid with red hair. A very eventful thing happened when we were attacked this day. We used to take classes, you know, silhouette, like what the ships were and all that. The Mitsubishi was a Betty, you know. And this kid was on a 20mm cannon. In fact, she typed up a story for me. And he says, "Here comes those itsy bitsy bastards," because he couldn't pronounce Mitsubishi. So on the way back to the stationery, we had a big laugh about it, you know, about the itsy bitsy bastards.
How do you think your time in the military affected your life?
Well, I grew up, I'll tell you that much. I don't like to say, you know, I don't want to see nobody die, but it did good for me. I grew up fast. First of all, I came from a very, very strict family. My father was very strict. Never drank, never smoked, and these are the things that I did in the service, which we all did. We drank jungle juice. You ever hear of tuba? Tuba is a coconut that these natives, when they climb a tree, first of all, you know, there's cannibals in New Guinea and everything. They tie a little string around their feet and they climb up so their feet don't spread, and they climb up and they take the husk and all, they whack off the top, and they put little BBs of yeast in there, with a little water, whatever they get, any kind of juice, and they plug it up, and you hear the stuff cooking. And it's called tuba, and you drink one shot of that, you want to pull a railroad car. But we drank anything. They made, well, the Southern boys, you know, the rebels, we call them rebels, they made jungle juice out of anything, out of raisins, and they sold it to us for cigarettes, and because we couldn't get on a beach. Whenever we got on a beach, whatever we could get, everybody smoked. Everybody, they wanted us to smoke. I guess it was a narcotic, you know, I don't know. Today, nobody wants, you can't smoke in a room like this, but wherever you did, you took a break, you had to smoke. And wherever we could get jungle juice, we did. And when these merchant marine ships came in, naturally they got a lot of money because they sold their booze for whatever they can get. They were civilians, and everybody hated them because they were making money. But I don't hate them. I take my hat off. We needed their supplies. But that was it.
Okay, do you have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Very good interview.
So you're gonna give me you're gonna send me a tape?
Yes,
Oh,
we
yes.
will.